Okay, we are live.
Excellent.
And we're admitting all guests now. All right.
Okay.
All right, take it away.
All right. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody to our Eastern Prince William County General Assembly session town hall for everybody who lives in the eastern part of Prince William. I'm Senator Scott Suravel. I have Senator McPike, Delegate Guzman, and our brand new delegate, Candy King, on to tell you a little bit about what we're doing and answer some questions. So before we kick into the substance of our presentation, we can go around. Everybody can introduce themselves really quick. And again, I'm Scott Suravel. I represent the 36th Senate District in terms of Prince William County. That's basically Occoquan. A little bit, it goes up Old Bridge Road towards the intersection of the Prince William Parkway. Woodbridge High School wraps around the southern part of along through Woodbridge on the east side of US 1 down to Dumfries Triangle. Then I go up 234 through Prince William Forest Park and up through Montclair, up to close to Colgan High School, but not quite there, near the Prince William County landfill. That's basically what I represent. Jeremy, why don't you go next?
Great. Thanks, Senator Suravel. Happy Saturday morning. Thanks for everyone for joining us this morning. I represent the 29th Senate District, which is starting from the eastern half, sort of the portions that Suravel did not describe, from Prince William Parkway south to about Cardinal Drive along Route 1, and then out 234 and Prince William Parkway to Manassas Park, and just about to the edge of 66. So it's great to be here and to see everyone virtually. It'd be much better in person, hopefully in the next couple months as we get through this, but look forward to the discussion today. Thanks for joining.
Guzman, you're next in seniority. Why don't you go next?
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Delegate Elizabeth Guzman, and along with the senators, we want to thank you and welcome Delegate Candy King for joining the Democratic majority. We are so happy. Hi, Bonnie, nice to see you. And I represent the 31st District, which includes parts of Prince William and Fauquier counties. I represent parts of the Eastern, Central, and Western side of Prince William County. Thank you, gerrymandering. So that's going to get fixed soon. But I have parts of Coles, parts of Potomac, and parts of Neabsco as well. So I'm very excited to be here and look forward to speaking with you about my priorities and to answer some questions that you may have. You can reach my office by dialing 804-698-1031 or emailing us at deleguzman@house.virginia.gov. Our office hours are Monday and Thursdays from 9 to 11, where you can schedule a Zoom appointment every 15 minutes, and Fridays from 9 to 1. Thank you.
Great. Delegate King, introduce yourself to everybody.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Candy Munden King. Fun fact, they actually require you to use your full legal name, and my legal name includes my maiden name. So in the House, you'll see me as Munden King, but everyone calls me Candy King. Confusing, I know. But I am the newest delegate, number 100 in seniority, actually. In the House of Delegates, I was elected fairly quickly, and I'm excited to join my Democratic colleagues in serving the Commonwealth. I've just put in the chat my legislative services page. You can go there to find my phone number as well as email address. And I have office hours every Friday from 1 to 3 p.m. I'm happy to chat with as many people as possible to find the best ways I can serve our community. And District 2 is, if you're traveling south on Route 1, everything to your left from the top of Prince William County, all the way down through Dumfries and a little bit of Triangle.
Excellent. So it's so good to have Delegate Munden King here, or Delegate King, however you would like us to call you, our newest member. So I'm going to talk really quick about a couple big issues going on. I'm going to talk a little bit about my legislative agenda, and then I'm going to let everybody else talk about what they're up to. So just so everybody understands, we're in our short session, that it's our 46-day session. You might have read in the papers it's 30 days. It's not. It's really going to be a 46-day session. That's what the plan is. And basically, we come back to make adjustments to our 2-year budget and then pass other legislation. The budget is kind of in flux right now. Part of it is we're waiting for our final revenue estimates, which come in February, but we're also expecting to see a big slug of federal aid now that we have Democratic control of the United States Senate. There's likely to be some significant state aid coming soon, and we might not even have to deal with that later, but that's going to make a big difference here in Virginia. And one other thing that I just want to mention before I forget is that earlier this week, the Commonwealth Transportation Board awarded a lot of money to two big projects in Prince William County. They awarded $50 million. Well, actually, staff recommended, it has been approved yet, but the staff recommendations always follow through. But there's $50 million for the widening of US 1 through Dumfries, which is going to be massive for Dumfries. It was the last slug of money they need to finish funding that project. It's going to completely transform the town. It's going to bring Route 1 together in one road going through town, and the other town road's going to become kind of a main street, like a town center. It's going to be really incredible. And then there's also $30 million to realign the Prince William County Parkway, where Old Bridge Road and the County Parkway come together. Right now, it's a big intersection. They're going to make it so you don't have to stop at the light as much, and it's instead of a four-way intersection, it's much more of like just a smooth turn. So that's been done. A couple other big issues that are out there. Marijuana legalization, which I'm going to leave to Jeremy because he's basically been leading our effort in the state Senate on that. I'm going to leave that for him to talk about. We have some big voting rights bills that are pending. A constitutional right to vote, which basically says it takes the last piece of Jim Crow out of our Constitution. Basically says, if you're 18 years old, you have the right to vote in Virginia. We're getting rid of the witness signature requirement on our absentee ballots, which is something that was temporary in the last election. I know Senator Adam Evans carrying a bill to prohibit firearms on Capitol Square permanently. Currently, that's just a rule, but we're going to put that in the code so that if we ever get a change in control or a different governor, that can't go away. And we got a lot of vaccine response legislation going on. One bill we just passed through the Senate yesterday was to make it a lot easier for a lot more people to administer vaccines who weren't legally authorized right now. And that's emergency legislation that we passed yesterday, and it's going to go over to the House and hopefully get out of there really quick. In terms of my legislation, we have a 12 bill limit in the Senate this year. I usually carry a lot more bills than this year, but given the nature of our virtual session, et cetera, and the way we can take testimony, we decided to limit our bills. And just so we're clear, the Senate is meeting actually in person. Senator McPike and I are down there in the Science Museum, spread out in a big room. Our committee rooms were equally spread out. We take all our testimony remotely. When members are waiting to introduce bills in committee, they even have to sit outside the room and wait for us to call them in. So we're being extraordinarily safe down there. But we are in person. The House, by the way, is completely virtual. But in terms of the bills I'm carrying, I'm going to highlight a few of them. I think Philip, my chief of staff, just put a PDF of my legislative agenda over there in the chat bar. If you want to download that and then find some stuff to ask me questions about. But just really quick, number one is I have a bill to authorize class action lawsuits in Virginia. We're the only state, us and Mississippi, the only two states in Virginia, America, where you can't file a class action lawsuit. And there's a lot of reasons why we need that, which I can go into if anybody likes. Number two is I want to raise the auto insurance minimums from $25,000 to $50,000. They haven't touched that number since I was 4 years old in 1975. Delegate King, I'm not sure if you were born yet then, but it's a number we need to adjust. Things cost a little more. Cars cost more.
Yeah, that was a couple of years before me.
Okay. So I think that's a number that probably ought to get fixed, but cars were a lot cheaper back then. It's important that people have enough insurance to cover when bad things happen. I have a bill to put some sunshine on the arbitration practices of companies. Companies are more frequently using arbitration to hide complaints of sexual discrimination, racial discrimination within their employees, and they're also using it to hide their misconduct when it comes to consumers. I have a big bill to reform our expungement process. Virginia has one of the most restrictive expungement processes in the country. It's really ridiculous. Happy to talk about that. I have a bill to confirm a person's right to file a civil lawsuit against law enforcement when they use excessive force. Sometimes police officers can escape liability through what's called qualified immunity, and this sort of confirms only in the context of when excessive force is used that a lawsuit can be brought. Legislation to repeal the death penalty. That's been moving through the system, and I'm very optimistic we can get that done. I'm happy to talk about that if anybody likes. I have a couple bills to help undocumented immigrants. Number one is a bill to allow more children and young adults to file for what's called special immigrant juvenile status through age 21. Right now in Virginia, they can do it up to age 18, but federal law allows it up to age 21. And this just brings Virginia law into concert with federal law. I also have a bill I just introduced on Friday, yesterday, that allows for undocumented immigrants who are crime victims to get police departments to complete paperwork, which allows them to apply for what's called a U visa. A lot of police departments around Virginia sort of slow walk the papers or refuse to fill them out for political reasons, and this would force them to do that. Then I have another bill to facilitate utility undergrounding on Route 1 in Fairfax County. And then the last bill I'm going to talk about has to do with requiring health insurance providers to submit their claims to your insurance company within a period of time. The reason that's important is because if you have a big copay, it's important you know where you stand. I'm sorry, not your copay. If you have a high deductible plan, it's important that you know where you stand on your deductible. And if your carrier doesn't put your bill in until like 6 months or a year, you can end up being surprised by a big medical bill that you didn't expect to have to pay. So that's some of the stuff I'm doing. I'm going to turn it over to Delegate Guzman, who can tell us what she's up to. Or no, I'm sorry, Senator McPike.
Oh, thank you, Senator Serville. I think first and foremost, all of us are focused on the vaccination process. We were on calls, always getting updates with the staff, trying to advocate for Prince William in terms of additional vaccines. As many of you know, it's limited by what we get from the suppliers, and it's really off the manufacturing line to the federal government, out to the states and out to localities. And so they're being used as quickly as they come in. I know the state dashboard has had some data issues that they're working on cleaning up. There's almost like 100,000 more vaccines that have actually been given than the dashboard says, due to some of the localities and how they're entering in some of the data. So we're hoping to get the additional report from the Department of Health on that this week. They have a team of 10 people that are working to make sure there's additional transparency on that. As Senator Serville said, I was happy, along with Senator Serville and others, to co-patron the vaccine, basically allowing additional licensed VDH health providers to give the vaccine. And so this bill will almost immediately triple the capacity in terms of those able to give the vaccine and really streamline the process for those medical professionals to sign up. So we're excited that's been sent over to the House. And so we're hoping our House colleagues also take quick action on that, which I know they will. A couple of bills I'm working on this year, one of which is a constitutional amendment to create an independent legislative compensation commission. The pay in the General Assembly has not changed since 1986, really. There's been other adjustments, but frankly, I don't think it's right for legislators to give themselves pay increases. There needs to be additional transparency to that. And the only way to do that is to take the appropriations language away from the legislative body and ensure that there's a fair process for review and approve compensation. And additionally, frankly, having, the General Assembly, the Senate makes $18,000 a year. The House is what, 17.8 or so. And so, for those who want to run also, it is a huge economic barrier to participate in the electoral process and consider running. And I think that's a challenge we also have to address, is ensure that there's a fair compensation structure that all folks in Virginia could actually find a means to represent their locality. And I think that's an important aspect that we're considering. Another major, really groundbreaking piece of legislation I'm working on is a follow-up to the Marcus Alert Bill, which is the behavioral health, mental health crisis response system that passed during special session. We're integrating the Marcus Alert mental health framework into the new National 988 hotline. As a part of my bill, I had also established, as part of STEP Virginia's framework, a call crisis center. So calls could be diverted and mobile crisis teams can respond to behavioral health, mental health incident in our communities. And so we are fully integrating that also with by 2022. You're familiar with 911? Well, there's going to be a national 988 number for both suicide prevention line as well as behavioral health crisis. And so this is an important major first step for Virginia to create and set up that framework in preparation for 2022. Also along the lines of mental health, I have a bill this year to protect patients' rights and their prescriptions for their prescriptions with mental health. Many times you see insurance companies require, unfortunately, folks to switch medications, and with mental health, that can be extremely detrimental. And so we're protecting patient prescription rights in that bill, and I'll be presenting that to Commerce and Labor this next Monday morning. A couple other tax credits I'm working on, I'm including this year the sunset of the coal tax credit. I serve on the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission, and they concluded a report this fall that basically said that we get 5 cents back on the dollar. And so the tax credit is just not a very effective one. In fact, we lose 35 jobs and $21 million in GDP through that tax credit. So I'm working to eliminate that tax credit and to ensure that we really refocus and reinvest in all parts of communities that make sense with our taxpayer dollars. And to that end, I'm also making an adjustment to our data center tax credit and refocusing efforts to Southside and Southwest, areas that are double distressed in their localities, to make sure that there are opportunities for the same kind of investment we've seen in Prince William and Loudoun. And frankly, if we're going to do some of those incentives, I want to see them in the areas that most need it. As you probably know, in Prince William, it's driving up some land price values. And frankly, it impacts sort of affordable housing when you have that same land for data centers is also competing for housing. And so I'm hoping to be able to better incentivize to other areas of Virginia through this effort. Another thing I'm working on is incentivizing more telework. I think we've seen through COVID, and I think many employers have realized that they can do a lot more of it. We've seen the traffic counts also lower. So it's my hope maybe we can invest a little bit less over time in the road projections and growth. I know in our area, we're just playing catch up and not even, we're trying to get to where we need to be on roads. But, it's really is my hope that telework and the lessons learned through COVID will remain, and we'll continue to innovate as Virginians as we rebuild, as we get through the other side of this pandemic. The other part, as a follow-up to some of what we experienced this year, is putting it permanently into our code, sort of the emergency framework for allowing localities to meet electronically during emergencies like this, and sort of setting out the rules of how to participate, making sure that there's still video access for public to comment. And this is something that our Freedom of Information Council reviewed, as well as our Virginia Press Association, through a process of deliberating and ensuring that if this sort of framework occurs, we already have the rules set out that everyone has already agreed to. So it's language similar that we passed in our emergency budget last year, but it's now putting it with a few additional tweaks into our permanent code. As another review, in preparing for session, I also want to look at what sort of innovations that happened during the pandemic. And one of which I clearly saw was, for instance, like Prince William Food Rescue. The ability to distribute 10 million pounds of food and have food resiliency in our community was just incredible to see sort of the innovation with the apps and volunteers and sort of the supply distribution. So I've put in a budget amendment to help platforms like that go regional and have a regional connectivity of food resiliency for our communities that need it. And so that I think is going to be a critical budget amendment that I'm also fighting for to make sure we pick out those innovations and try to support them. And lastly, Senator Serval mentioned marijuana legalization. Senator Adam Eben and Luis Lucas are carrying the bill in the Senate. I was appointed as the chair of the Rehab and Social Services Committee, the subcommittee to review the legislation, and Senator Serval and several other senators were on that subcommittee with me this past week. It's about a 400-page bill that we had to pour through roughly 10,000 lines of legislation. and work through the framework. There's some really critical, important decisions as we consider it. Obviously, there's the health impacts, but there's also sort of the communities that have been impacted over policing. JLARC also did a report this past fall and found that the disparity between minority communities and white communities, if you're in the minority community, you're roughly 3.5 times likely, even though the same exact usage and percentages, you're 3.5 times likely to be convicted and arrested. And so there are really interesting data about it. Part of the legislation we're trying to consider is the social equity component. If we're going to start up a new industry in Virginia and legalize it, we want to make sure that impacted communities have means to participate. And so that was a large part of the consideration in our work in subcommittee this week, was to identify means to make sure that there's a strong framework in place to begin with before licensing applications, for small business development, for outreach, to help folks build business plans. And so in our substitute we adopted this past week, which ended up being about 500 pages, we put in stronger timeframes. Additionally, it would be a new agency. It would not fall under ABC, to ensure strong social equity components with an entirely new team to deal with it. We gave 1 year ramp up before licensing to make sure the social equity business development units were in place. And by doing so, we had to extend the time frame of legalization to 2024. The original proposal was 2023, but I think the committee felt strongly it was much better to do it right than try to do it fast. And so additionally, we wanted to make sure that we had a year's worth of public awareness and safety campaign leading up to it for impairment, other resources, and dedicate strong resources to public health and substance use disorders as well. The other funding percentages go to pre-K and other early education initiatives. And so there's sort of a balance across where the funding is going to be designated to some really key and core equity and education components that the bill still has a long way to go. It has been re-referred over to judiciary to deal with expungement, crime levels, thresholds, and other things for consideration. Then it would go to Senate Finance to take a look at that, and then on and over to the House. And the House is also working on a version. And so there's going to have to be, as the bill proceeds, lots of collaboration along the way. So that consumed roughly 6.5 hours alone on that one bill this week. We took over 100 people gave public testimony through 2 days, roughly 3.5 hours each day, just dedicated to that discussion alone. So more to come on that as the bill continues through the process. So appreciate the opportunity to hear your questions, and look forward to the discussion today.
Hey, Senator, I don't know about your watch, but I counted about 10 hours. So I think it was
Okay.
The 6.5 hours was just for subcommittee alone, and then we had full committee on Friday morning for another couple hours. So yeah.
right. Delegate Guzman, what's going on in the House?
Well, thank you, Senator. Well, I look forward to be looking at that bill that you guys were describing about allowing more individuals to provide the vaccination. You know, as a person that I've already received the first dose and looking forward to receive the second dose, I could tell that it takes a village to make things happen. And I know State Senator and we both work for Alexandria. So it was like a 6-month planning before it came out. And the feedback that we get, at least in Alexandria, not here in Prince, which is like I'm living in 2 different states. So I would like to use this opportunity also as well, that it requires a lot of effort from localities and health districts as well in preparation to the distribution. You know, it's because I think the vaccines are out there, but it was a lot of preparation. As a person who was in part and at the table during these conversations, we were preparing for 4 months, looking at the amount of population that we have, looking at the different phases and implementation. So I will tell you that when that distribution comes and you are part of it, it's going to be like about 100 individuals just volunteering in one location, from managing the parking lot, from managing, taking your temperature, verifying and going over the questions that we usually go, and then certifying that you have an appointment. And then there is different stations inside where you will travel and you have to keep socially distant. Then you're gonna have to wait afterwards for 30 minutes for secondary effects. just in case you have an allergy. So it is like a whole logistics. And I know this is, when we talk about logistics and operations, this is the bread and butter of Senator McPike. So he knows what it takes, I mean, to prepare for that. So I mean, from my point, I wanna, once again, I'm open mind about looking at the bill, but I think that the struggles are different. But I will invite you to look at, we are right now in conversations with the health department, and we are going, the health department and the Department of Health Human Resources, to hold a town hall here in Virginia. I think we have the opportunity to discuss with them and so they can tell us about the struggles. You know, I know there are a lot of glitches when you're trying to book your appointment here in Prince William County. You know, my mother, who is 78, for example, you know, she's being waitlisted for over a week now. So, which is not the reality for other localities. I see struggles in Prince William County. I see struggles in Virginia Beach. So we just have to just dive into the issue and realize what is really going on. But they are gonna come next weekend. We're waiting confirmation, but please, I will follow through with details. Stay tuned, because we definitely wanna bring the state to Prince William County to provide some answers. You know, as far as the legislation in the House, I will start with my legislation. You know, I'm coming back with paid sick days for essential employees. I think it's extremely important. Taking the example of Alexandria, we've seen a lot of essential workers not showing up to get the vaccine. And the reason is because they are not getting compensated to go and get this vaccine, or if they have to stay home for a day or 2 days, you know, they are not guaranteed that they will be paid. So that's a conversation that we definitely would like to have. You know, at this time, it's going to be available only for essential workers. And we're talking about essential workers. We're talking about emergency personnel, healthcare workers, food plant workers, home health care workers, workers at essential retail businesses identifying Executive Order 72, childcare workers, domestic workers, and teachers and support staff. So that's a bill that it's going to be heard this Tuesday. So if you have a testimony that you would like to share, that hearing is going to be happening this Tuesday at 11 a.m. I'm also bringing a bill that it's a key priority for the League of Conservation Voters that passed yesterday the full committee of rules. So it's coming soon into the floor, and it's a gold mining moratorium. So issues a moratorium on new gold mining permits in Virginia until 2024, so that a study can be conducted on the potential health, safety, and environmental impacts of gold mining. I don't know if you remember about the Atlantic Coast pipelines and Union Hill. Well, it happens to be that there is a Canadian organization that have purchased thousands of acres on that same location in Buckingham County, and they are having more than a year of exploratory drilling. So mining involves a lot of substances such as mercury, arsenic, and cyanide that can make their way into the water supply. So this is particularly concerning, given how close the site is to the James River. And this issue is not unique to the Buckingham County, because actually the gold pirate belt extends from Fairfax County to Appomattox. So this bill has wide-ranging implications for the state. So I hope when it comes to the Senate, we can get the support that we need. Then my bill for the dignity of an ID for undocumented immigrants has passed full committee of transportation this week, so it's coming to the floor soon, and is to allow non-drivers in the undocumented community to apply for a state issue card. Last year we had the driving privilege cards, and I want to thank, Senator Sorvell for championing that issue and for the support of Senator Mike Pike. And I know this issue was really personal also for Candy, because Candy, Bonnie, and I I've been working in the Woodbridge Democrats for quite a few years now. So that's not new to us. That was an issue very important in that community. And this ID will allow to more actively engage in our community, the undocumented brothers and sisters to actively engage in our communities and economy. An ID allows you to open a bank account, enter your child to school, rent an apartment. And I think that everybody reserves the dignity of an ID. We're also my bill that will provide an alternate state hiring process for people with disabilities just left the subcommittee of general laws is going to be heard in full committee next week. It's a bill that it's indicating to the Department of Human Resources and Management to create, to hire people with disabilities through a non-competition, so they could provide kind of, if they could do the job well, and they're offer a permanent position. So it came with unanimous support. So I hope that when it goes to the Senate, we can find the support that we need. It's been supported by the ARC of Virginia and all of the organizations with people with disabilities in the state. Repetitive motion injuries for workers' compensation. My bill turned into study last year, so that study is back. I would make Virginia the 50th state in the nation in which corpus compensation covers repetitive motion injuries. And we're talking about here, including carpal tunnel syndrome. So, and then we also have another issue, which is latent disease and injury. Virginia is one of the 5 states that do not work or latent disease and injury other than asbestos. So my bill will allow for other injuries, latent disease and injuries, to be covered after diagnosed for 2 years. And this will mirror what we have for asbestos right now in the Commonwealth. It passed yesterday, the Civil Court Committee, and it's coming to full courts of justice next week. And I will have more information as we develop the conversation. And I will yield the floor to my dear friend, Delegate Candy King.
Thank you. Thank you. So, as many of you know, I came into the session with 7 days to start, and Madam Speaker was gracious enough to allow me to introduce 2 new pieces of legislation because obviously due to the timeline of my election, the pre-file deadlines had passed. So I'm fortunate enough, though, to pick up some very important things to our community to patron as well. So first is to expand the benefits, who receives benefits for military survivors. So I'm proud to introduce a constitutional amendment that would expand the real estate tax exemption for surviving spouses. So what does that mean? That means that those who serve our country and are tragically killed in action, right now their spouses receive a benefit. But there are many of our heroes who come home and are disabled and have continuing chronic conditions as a result of their service, and unfortunately may pass away years later. And currently their spouses do not receive those benefits, even though their injuries are service connected. And as many of you know, I'm an Army wife, and I would love to see that change and to see those families receive some seemingly small token for everything that they've sacrificed. So this is something that I received a lot of support from the community, as well as the Joint Leadership Committee and veterans organizations. Very proud to do that as well. The second piece that I've been able to introduce is a bill to require the State Board of Education to update its special education worksheets and criteria. As we know, our students with special needs are suffering tremendously during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so this is a way to get rid of some of the vagueness and ambiguity in some of the worksheets and criteria that we use for students with special needs. I am proud to join my colleagues on all of the paid sick and family leave legislation because, as you know, when I ran as someone who would fight for working families. And right now, I believe COVID is raging our communities because we don't have paid sick leave. People feel forced to go to work and sick, and to make a choice between your livelihood and feeding your family and your life, I think is just inhumane. So I am proud to join my colleagues in supporting that as well. Other COVID-19 related initiatives that I'll be supporting as a co-patron include expanding access to telemedicine. As we've seen during the pandemic, and I've seen this personally with my special needs child, being able to have a call with the doctor has saved us, from potentially contracting COVID by having to go out to the hospital. And so I think that is one of the lessons, one of the bright spots in the COVID pandemic is that we can continue to have access to qualified nurses and doctors through telemedicine. Like many people here, I'm deeply concerned about the lack of access to the COVID vaccination. And I'm tremendously, tremendously grateful for our healthcare professionals who are working very hard. But like you, I am leaning on my senior members, my senators, and those who have a seniority less than 100, because I am number 100, leaning and working with them to really figure this out. Our community has been one of the hardest hit in the state by COVID-19. We need vaccinations now. So I'm excited to join them in the fight for that. And our senators have definitely kept me up to speed on all of the efforts to get vaccines into our communities. We are working really hard to do that. So a couple of other things that I'm working on is actually to expand the Autism Missing Child. I'm a chief co-patron for the legislation to expand the Autism Missing Child program to the Autism Missing Person program, which would include adults as well. And so another thing I'm focused on is I'm joining my colleagues in a request for a 2-year study of transit equity and modernization in the Commonwealth. We all know, living here, especially along Route 1, we're spending, more time in traffic. It's been a little better, but, I'm hopeful that things will get back to normal as we have more people vaccinated. So I can control many things, but apparently I can't control the sun. So I apologize. But those are the things that I'm working on. I have been fortunate to be placed on the Privileges and Elections Committee, the Finance Committee, as well as the Public Safety Committee. And on Privileges and Elections, I've been, working very hard to ensure that we expand access to voting here in the Commonwealth, that we continue the great work that all of these people here on the call that we elected have done in the last few years. We have to protect that. So on Privileges and Elections, I'm working to move, to vote and move forward with things that will allow easier access to the ballot box, as well as safe access. We've seen with the events of the last couple of weeks how, people use intimidation, and that has no place in our polling places. So those are some of the things I've been working on Privileges and Elections. I'm also very proud. So a couple of other pieces I've picked up of legislation I've picked up, which actually one of them passed the House yesterday, which will help small women and minority-owned businesses get access to loans and grants. This is something, as we travel up and down Route 1, the fabric of our community is in our small businesses. And there are some ways that the state could be supporting them, providing access, especially for those who are denied a certification. I have a bill to create a process for those businesses to apply for, an appeal if they're denied. So those are very exciting things. Everything is happening very fast, and I'm available in here, and I've responded to as many emails as I possibly can. But my legislative assistant is on as well. Her name is Lexi Harris. So if you see her in the chat, you can bother me and Lexi. You can send us both emails and calls. So, but thank you.
Great. Thanks, Candy. Again, it's good to have you. And yeah, it looks like the Lord has appeared behind you and is showering his rays of sunshine down on you. So.
And I moved. I actually moved, and I moved in the wrong direction.
It's all good. Hey, so Philip, where are we on questions? You want to read a couple questions to us that have come in?
Sure. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions coming in on the Facebook first. So I'll go ahead and take the first one here. George Becerra, actually in Fairfax, is asking about governor's schools bill coming out of the Education Committee. I believe that's on the House side, but maybe you'd like to speak just a little bit about governor's schools generally and legislation on that.
Yeah. Whose bill is that, by the way? Is it Keem or?
I was just trying to look it up. It might be Keem. I'm trying to find it right now.
Okay. So, yeah, so Virginia has about, I think it's 19 governor schools. Most of them are during the summer, and governor schools are basically a place that students that want to get a sort of a specialized education with a bunch of kids that have sort of the same interest, same focus. So we, like, for example, have during the summers, there's like an arts governor school, there's a science governor school, there's a math governor school, I think. There's some language governor schools for each language. But the state also has 3 full-time governor schools. There's Maggie Walker in Richmond. There's another one in Southside, which name I can't remember. And then there's the one everybody knows about is Thomas Jefferson. And the state provides supplemental funding to each of these schools in addition to the monies they normally receive. And the problem that's arisen is that these schools do not look anything like the jurisdictions that they serve. So Thomas Jefferson pulls kids out of both Prince William, Fairfax, Arlington, and Alexandria. I believe Loudoun has gotten out. Oh, no, Alexandria doesn't go, I think, and Loudoun, I think, is pulled out. But the surrounding jurisdictions are about 34% free reduced lunch. Thomas Jefferson, I think, is about 1.5% to 2% now. The demographics of the school look nothing like the jurisdictions they represent. The schools I represent in the Route 1 corridor, the schools that all of us actually represent on the Route 1 corridor, have a really hard time getting any kids in. For example, one school I represent, Walt Whitman Middle School, I think 125 kids applied over a 5-year period, and I think 2 got in. Whereas there's other schools in Fairfax County that admit like 35% of the entire class out of 2 middle schools, right? And, Fairfax, Prince William, Arlington, whatever, there's probably a total of 50 middle schools that feed it, but like a third of the class comes out of 2 schools. It's completely messed up, and it's not fair. It's a publicly funded taxpayer school. And so we had a work group that met over the summer. I was on it along with Senator Louise Lucas, who was the co-chairman of it. And there were a couple of other delegates on it, Delegate Corey, Delegate Bulova, Delegate Keem. And we looked at what we could do, and what other states have done, and actually what the Ivy League has done, is they've gotten rid of admission tests as a prerequisite to getting in. There's not an Ivy League college you can go, you apply to anymore that requires you to do an SAT. And when you do these test-based admissions process, what it does is it favors wealthy families that have the money to go hire consultants to teach their kids how to take a test. And so if you have a much more holistic admissions process, it allows for a class that is much more representative of our community, economically and otherwise. So basically the legislation that's out there, I believe what it does is it says that none of these schools can use a test-based model to admit children. It also, I believe, places caps on the number that can come from any one middle school, and those are the major thrust of it. And I think that'll go a long way towards making these schools much more equitable and fair for everybody.
Would any other legislators? Yeah, thanks.
So, Philip, just as a order of business, I guess, for folks that are joined on Zoom to raise their hands, correct? Is that what we want?
Yeah, if people can raise their hands or put their name in the chat, they're welcome to ask their own question, or if they'd like to write their question out, I'm happy to read it as well.
Okay, what else? Anybody else? What else we got,
looks
Philip?
like we've got one from Jen Mosley, and if you'd like to speak for yourself, Jen, I can unmute you now. John Mosley.
John, yes.
Yep, there you go.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm a lawyer, and during this economic showdown, of course, there are a great many of things that we need to do to protect the unemployed and debtors. One thing I run into is this minority but firmly held belief that ordinary debts can be collected by contempt of court, including imprisonment. I think the General Assembly needs to make clear that by passing a whole barrage of means to collect a debt, garnishments, which have limits, which have, are supposed to be balanced against a person's ability to pay, debtors interrogatories, that the General Assembly meant to repeal the use of show causes for contempt and the possibility of imprisonment because there are at least one judge, Judge Richard Gardner, in Fairfax, is determined to believe that he can find people in contempt for a debt. Now remember that if a debt goes through any form of court, it's a court order, no matter what the debt is. The vast majority of debts that have touched a court are a court order. So it's being confused between the court's ability to enforce a court order versus that any debt can be collected by contempt of court, fines measuring up to 100% interest, and the threat of jail. And at this time, I think we need to make clear that that's not who Virginia is. And it never. And I think it was. There's a Supreme Court decision in 1968 saying that it's a violation of the 13th Amendment to imprison somebody for court costs that are not part of the criminal punishment. But for some reason this year, when I filed a petition for writ of prohibition, the Supreme Court didn't, decline to do the obvious. So I think there's some confusion at this time. We need to make clear that that we're not going to scare the living daylights out of all the Virginia people who have debts, who have difficulties, and things like that. That this is the wrong time for lawyers to go around saying that they're going to throw somebody in jail, and it is happening. I also think that I've tried to get in Congress some of the Republicans that I know and things to pay attention to. We're going to have, of course, an eviction catastrophe at some point of people losing their homes in mortgage or renters under this thing when the limit goes off, and you're going to need to look at that in a lot of ways. I suggested that, like the old savings and loan crisis, that we might need to do something. I don't know if Virginia can afford to do it alone without federal help, but that an entity would buy accounts receivables like old rent, make everybody happy. So you're not just dumping on the landlords and the mortgage companies, but the government a government entity could buy those debts. Then later, after the crisis is over, could try to collect them eventually when it's probably easy once the economy is back. But I think a lot of people are worried that we're going to have, all of the problem. People are not going to avoid COVID-19 living under a bridge.
All right, Jonathan. So first of all, I think I can answer both your questions. First of all, with regard to the debt collection piece, at least in my experience, the courts only use the contempt of court when a judgment debtor is sort of failing to behave. I've only ever seen somebody go, for example, to jail if they refuse to come to court to answer questions about what their assets and liabilities are, or if they just flat out refuse to respond to a garnishment summons. And so, if there's a court order telling you to do something, you don't do it. That what they typically do is contempt. We did abolish, debtors' prisons probably 100 years ago in Virginia, but I rarely see the contempt power used unless you have a party who's just misbehaving. If people just answer the questions and say, I don't have any money, then they usually don't go to jail. So it doesn't seem like it's a problem to me, but if you got a specific case, I'm happy to take a look at it. Richard Gardner's in Fairfax. I represent Fairfax County. We review the Fairfax judges when they're up for re-election, and I'm happy to look at that. On your second question, in our special session, we made a lot of changes to the eviction process. A lot of changes. Landlord-tenant's been changed massively in the last year and a half. It's become a lot more complicated. First of all, it's a lot harder to evict somebody now. We got rid of the 5-day pay or quit notice. Now you have to give people a 10-day pay or quit notice. Also, once people have been given that notice, they have an opportunity to redeem, that is to pay their rent. That wasn't the case before. We also have required in the special session, we passed legislation that says in any pay or quit notice that you give people, it has to contain information for different agencies that are providing rental assistance. We've appropriated a lot of money, and there's some of our localities as well have made these funds available to pay people's rent. And the landlords are being strongly encouraged to work with their tenants to get them to those agencies to get that rent paid, because that's a lot cheaper for the landlord than actually evicting someone. And a lot of landlords have been doing that. So there's no question. I agree with you, though. There's no question there's a potential tsunami of evictions coming because of the economic distress that's out there. And some of these agencies have been slow to pay out the rental assistance, but we've tried to do a lot to mitigate the effects of this practice. And as I think being a lawyer, that the Supreme Court of Virginia has said they're not going to issue any more eviction moratoria, and we can't control that really for a lot of reasons, constitutionally and otherwise. But I think we're making some progress on it. But it's really a problem. I agree with you about that. So Philip, and thanks for your questions, John. Philip, what do we got next?
There we go. I'm unmuted now. We've got a question from Jean Reicher-Westcott. Will the budget issues caused by the COVID crisis affect the planning? And are we confident that the federal relief will get us back on track? And are we operating on multiple tracks to get things running?
Where's Delegate Luke Torian when we need him? Jeremy, what do you want to take a budget shot or?
Yeah. I mean, I guess one of the things we look to, there are two major drivers that are going on right now. Clearly, the new Congress coming in and the changes there. We are certainly looking towards relief at the local and state level and different provisions that might be further considered. The other thing that we also look to is our revenue reforecast that come out here, I guess, Senator Servell, in about a week or two. That helps us to really gauge on what the available resources are in Virginia. So while we have many budget amendments in the governor's budget that we're considering, we also sort of need to make sure they all add up. In Virginia, we're required to have a balanced budget by the Constitution. And so all of those things are going to greatly influence what we're able to do this session. A lot of the initiatives that you heard today also require revenue and resources. And so, the tough thing through the process is making sure all those numbers add up. And I think, certainly with the new Congress and new president and vice president, we're looking forward to hopefully some more relief at the local level. So stay tuned. We don't have all those numbers yet. Some of the revenue projections were a little bit better than expected for Virginia. So I think I am hopeful at this point, but we'll see what the revenue forecast comes out here in, like I said, in about 7 to 10 days.
Right. And one other thing, I was talking to Senate finance staff a couple of days ago, and they said that there might be some requirements in the federal grant monies that come that require us to match certain or maintain effort or match certain monies they send us, which could put obligations on us that we're not anticipating right now when this federal aid comes through to help us with vaccine distribution or helps to fund things like, for example, we might be looking at year-round schooling to try and recover from all this. And so when that federal money comes, it might come with some additional obligations for us that we need to make sure we hold back some money to, just in case we get hit with that, because unlike the federal government, we can't borrow money. We have to balance our budget every year. So we have to be pretty prudent in how we budget. Philip, or anybody else, Elizabeth or Candy, you guys want to say anything about that or no? Okay.
All right. Moving on, we've got Elena Schlossberg-Kunkel asking, can you speak to solar renewable energy certificates in Virginia? It's a way to incentivize renewable energy, such as we have in DC. You want to talk about solar generally and what progress we made last year?
Sure, we made a lot of progress. Who wants to go first? I feel like I'm going first a lot. Anybody? I'm happy to go, but.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to look at the specific provisions for this year yet. Just digesting the thousands of bills we're working through right now. I'll certainly take a look at it. I think there's a number of different things that are innovative going on, both in the solar space as well as carbon sequestration space as well. That will hopefully continue to leverage our assets and focus our priorities on climate change. And I think that the interesting thing and momentum of the last couple of years is you've seen more areas and senators and legislators areas have been impacted by flooding, as well as the Hampton Roads area impacted by sea level rise. And so I think you've really started to see a shift, in some cases bipartisan, to say this is a problem. We've got to focus on it. We've got to look at reducing our carbon footprint and ways to incentivize it. So I haven't looked at the specific bills for this year, but the momentum is certainly headed in the right direction.
Yeah. What I would say is, Elena, it's good to see you, and thanks for all the advocacy you do out there in the Rural Crescent in Western Prince William. We passed many bills last session that have sort of turbocharged solar in Virginia. One of which is the Virginia the VCEA, the Virginia Clean Energy Act, which basically requires Virginia to transition to carbon-free energy systems, I think by 2050. Is it 2040 or 50, Jeremy? You remember? I think it's 20. I don't know. It's in a decade or two. And my guess is sooner or later it's going to be sped up. But in any event, it requires a transition. And most people expect us to transition away from carbon-based production in the next 10 to 15 years, I think. So anyways, that was the biggest thing that happened. That's going to affect mostly things at the utility scale level. But we also made it easier for localities to procure their own solar or to build their own solar panels on their projects. Previously, the panels had to be connected to their meter. That's not the case anymore. Now they can net panels from one location against meters on another location, which is a big advantage, for example, school systems or local governments. We also made it easier for owners of apartment buildings or commercial buildings to place panels and allow them to net for the benefit of all their apartment people that live in their apartments or their or businesses that locate. One bill that I passed last session allows for Virginia to have what's called community net metering. And what that means is that a series of people can pool their monies to buy the electricity off of panels located somewhere else and net it against their meter on their house or their business. And the reason that's important is under the old law, again, you had to have the panel hooked up to the meter. So you have to have the panel up on your roof connected to your meter. In my neighborhood, for example, we have lots of trees and I'm not going to cut down my trees. So if I want to have solar to net against my panel, I can buy energy from a company that builds a set of panels like down the street. They can put it on a church or a shopping center parking lot, or they can build it, at some open space, say like, Prince William County Government Center or something. And I can net those panels against my house, right? Or if you're in a business and you lease your business, you don't own your roof. And so, it doesn't make sense to make a 20-year investment in solar panels on your roof when you don't own the roof. You know if you're going to be there in 20 years, but you could actually buy the energy off these panels that net against your panel. And so anyways, they're doing this all over the country. It wasn't allowed in Virginia, but last year I passed legislation to allow that up to 250 megawatts, and they can expand it more than that once they meet some low income targets. That is, if they have to sell a certain percentage of their access to low income customers. So I'm excited about that. But Elena, I think your question had to do with the certificates, which I think are called renewables energy certificates, or the RECs. And typically you only have access to RECs if you buy the panels yourselves. If they're on your roof, then you get the renewable energy certificates that are generated by the electricity generated on your panel, and then you can sell them to other people. And so that discussion is sort of part of each of these individual plans, who owns the RECs. And the solar industry, to my knowledge, hasn't asked us to do anything different or in addition to what we've already done on that. But it's definitely a key part of making solar economic in all of these transactions. And so I think we're making big progress on that in the last couple of years, or the last two sessions now.
We have a question about voting. So I'm going to ask Deborah Johnson to unmute herself now.
Good morning, Senator Searle. Thanks for hosting this. I was so excited to see so much participation in the federal elections recently. I wonder if there is legislation underway or discussions, anything already in the works to continue that, vote by mail, sort of very easy early voting.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
Go ahead, Delegate Candy King, you got it.
So on the Privileges and Elections Committee and on the House side, we actually have a voting rights bill that would, and I think Senator Servell mentioned it before, but it would eliminate some of those barriers and put some checks and balances for localities for some of these things that, like the ID requirement that continues to come back. We're, fighting against that. And, because people came out and voted in such large numbers, we have people in place in leadership that is actually, supporting access versus restriction. So there are quite a few bills to expand curbside voting, the signature requirement, permanently removing that, as well as Sunday and at the registrar voting has been proposed as well.
Yeah, and Deborah, I think a big reason why we had the turnout we had is some of the law changes we made last session, like for the no excuse early voting and the 45-day early voting period. I think elimination of the witness signature requirement is going to result in a lot fewer ballots being disqualified for unnecessary reasons. We're about to pass that bill this session to make that permanent. I think the drop boxes make a big difference. We also passed the bill last year, which did not go in effect last year, but will go into effect this coming election, which allows you to sign up for being on a permanent early voting list. So they will mail you an absentee ballot every single year if you sign up to do that. So you don't have to sign up every single year. And that bill, that'll start coming up here. And I would just note that you can see the difference it has. If you look at what happened in Delegate King's election just the other day, a big part of her margin came from the early voting period. Unlike other elections, we had special elections, we had a 5 or 6 day like early voting period before her election. And previously you would have to come and fill out some papers and say you had some excuse and whatever. And we don't have that anymore. And I think that makes a big difference in terms of people participating. So. Philip, what do we got next?
Great. Our next question is from Bonnie on Zoom, asking for support for HB 1804, which is a bill from Delegate Orrock to direct the Department of Conservation and Recreation to develop recommendations for dedicated sources of funding for state parks that will be relatively stable from year to year. And this bill has so far had unanimous support in the House Ag Committee, and looks like it's on the floor right now in the House.
Well, that sounds like one I need to co-sponsor. Philip, why don't you get on that?
Will do.
But Candy King and I represent the two state parks. I actually have 3. Candy represents 2 of them with me, but I represent more state parks than anybody in the legislature, and they are wonderful assets, and they are totally underfunded. And I have a budget amendment, which I didn't mention, to fund phase 2 and 3 construction at Widewater State Park. That costs about $29 million to build out. They want to have some cabins there, some better trails, a better boat ramp, some other things like that. We want to have a nature center there for the schools to teach kids in. But we have a big property there, which was donated to the state by Dominion Resources back in 1984. That we've turned into a state park, and we want to make it a wonderful facility. At least Sylvania is just gets destroyed on weekends. It gets so popular, it gets filled up, and
you can barely get in.
Yeah, so Candy, you need to co-sponsor that bill along with me.
Okay, I will, Bonnie. Well, first, I know how passionate you all are about state parks, so I'm happy. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, Candy, you and I need to do a big joint event down at Lee Sylvania State Park. We had a big party down there for everybody.
Yes, I got my COVID vaccination party.
All right, we have a question coming in from Facebook from one of our Virginia all-time great activists, Eileen Davis. As a nurse and member of the Medical Reserve Corps, to enlist more nurses, she's asking us to enlist more nurses, especially retired nurses over 65 with active licenses. Are ready to go to staffing. What's holding them up is getting vaccinated to safely participate. So she's saying that nurses are having trouble participating in the Medical Reserve Corps because they're having trouble getting vaccinated. So anything further we can say about vaccinations there?
I think our resident EMT, Senator McPike, you have anything you want to say about that?
Sure. Most of the centers are providing vaccines for those professionals that are signing up to do the vaccination process. So that's for all the sites I've seen, they've been including that and offering that to ensure that they're enlisting as many folks as possible. So I think that's pretty standard across all sites. There might be some other sites run by different groups, but in terms of the health departments that I've worked with and seen, they've all been offering that to ensure people are willing to step up and still remain safe.
All right, moving on to a question about criminal justice reform. Robert Legge, also coming in from Facebook, is promoting HB 2303, which is defelonization of drug possession. Would you support a Senate version? Oklahoma and Utah have done it.
Well, first of all, I've been very involved in the criminal justice reform effort, both our special session and in general. It's part of what I do for a living. And in general, I do support that. I think it's the right thing to do. I don't think there's a Senate bill that's been introduced to do it. We haven't really studied it carefully. And when you start making big changes in the law, a lot of people like to see a lot of vetting before you do that. For example, running something through like the Crime Commission or the Virginia Criminal Justice Conference is another body that we look at, because a lot of times when you make big changes to multiple statutes at once, it can have unintended consequences, and you want to make sure it's been looked at properly. But I definitely think it's something we need to look at. I mean, one of the mistakes a lot of people have that don't deal with people get caught up in the system with drug problems like I do is that, you know, what you tend to see is that a lot of people who get charged with drug offenses tend to be addicted, and it really tends to be an outgrowth of mental health problems and a means of self-medication, as opposed to, you know, somebody just going out to take some drugs to party or something. I mean, it's often not like that. And so what we end up doing with these statutes, from my point of view, is felonizing mental illness a lot of the times. And that's how these problems usually ought to be dealt with, as opposed to putting a badge on somebody where they have to, you know, carry around a felony the rest of their life. But I think it's definitely something we need to look at. I'm not sure about its chances this session, though, because we haven't really talked about it as a caucus, because it's not a proposal that's been made in prior sessions, and so a lot of people just aren't used to it, and I'm not sure how well it's been vetted. But I think it's a good idea. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on it, but
if not, I can move on. We have a question from Lisa Polgar. Lisa, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your question. Otherwise, I can read it off for you.
My dog is barking. Maybe you can just read it. Sorry.
No problem. I'd be happy to. Lisa asks, is it possible to reduce the fees for entering state parks for low-income families? Some cannot afford to go to Leesylvania or other parks.
yeah, you know, it's possible, but it's really the source of their revenue. And I don't know, I think it'd be hard to sort of validate whether somebody's low income or not to get in. I mean, you might get the situation where everybody says they're low income and you end up losing more fees than you should. I mean, that's something I'm just not clear how you would implement that. But either of you guys have any thoughts about it?
I agree, and I think that gets to Bonnie's earlier, the legislation and the like that she proposed. Our state parks are treasures, but it does cost to run them. So I think it's something to look at, but the implementation is something. And I know people hate to hear this, but because Virginia loves studies, but I definitely think it's something that would have to be studied first, because we have to maintain these beautiful state parks, and that requires money.
Great, thank you both. Another question coming in from Facebook from Debbie Taylor Roulier. I'd like your support on any effort to expand broadband, especially in the rural areas of Virginia. The haves versus the have-nots have become quite obvious with the COVID pandemic and virtual schooling. If families don't have access to a hotspot and have to rely on paper packets, they get no support or feedback from teachers when they do their work. This is a huge problem in the rural areas of Virginia, such as Russell County, Smith County, etc. These folks often do not have access to communal Wi-Fi hotspot. Her family in Russell County, she has family in Russell County, so supporting this broadband down there would mean a lot to her. Thanks.
So I absolutely agree. And you see, I have a little visitor here. I absolutely agree and support efforts to expand broadband. I think during virtual learning, as well as even the virtual General Assembly session, for me, it has shown the need that we have to get serious about expanding broadband. And there are several, and you can tell her she could follow up with me, because there are several pieces of legislation in the House that seek to do that.
Yeah, I would just point out that in our body, I know Senator Boysko is now the chairman of the Virginia Broadband Commission, which I used to serve on a long, long time ago. But she has one that authorizes local school systems to enter into contracts or agreements with local broadband providers to collaborate to make sure that students have access to broadband. That's really more of a solution in areas that already have the existing infrastructure for it. But she also introduced legislation that allows a phase 1 or 2 utility, which is basically like Dominion or APCO, our 2 investor-owned utilities in Virginia, to provide broadband services and recover those costs from customers, which is absolutely critical. I mean, a lot of people forget that the way we got universal electrification and phone service in America is through regulated monopoly utilities. We directed them, basically ordered them to string the wires, string up everywhere and make sure everybody got it. And then we made everybody pay for it. And in the Reagan era, we moved away from this and decided we're going to deregulate everything. And you see, they brought us our wonderful cell phone service where your phone drops all the time, and this broadband coverage, which, you know, is what it is. And so the regulated monopoly model actually has a lot to offer when it comes to providing universal service to everybody. And from my point of view, that might be the way we have to get there, because what we've been doing for the last 20 years isn't working. And this pandemic has totally highlighted the need and the unfulfilled need we have around our state. So I think the governor also, I think, appropriated a lot of money in the last budget. I think in our last budget, I think we had a lot of money to expand broadband in Virginia. I don't know, Jeremy, I don't know if you remember those numbers, but I know it was in the tens of millions of dollars, and it was some of the biggest investments we've ever made from the state level. But that's my vague memory of it. So,
yeah, just to also add to that, as a part of the coal field of the coal tax credit sunsetting and eliminating it, it actually eliminates some money to Southwest. And so I put in a budget amendment this year also to dedicate $2 million to the Virginia Economic Coalfield Development Authority for innovative solutions to basically impossible to reach areas in Russell County. It's covered by that area. And just a few weeks ago, Norton and Wise just had an initial pilot with Starlink. So it's actually a satellite service which has a higher latency and improved feed from prior satellite services that is being distributed in the school systems now. And so it's an innovative thing that's happened during COVID, that where we do have near impossible places, not just not served, but near impossible places to reach due to the terrain and geography issues, that we also got to make sure that every kid has an access to learn. And right now that just isn't happening. And so we've got to continue to find ways to innovate on all fronts.
Great. Moving on to a question from Dina Bayer. What is the status of HB 2130, which would authorize an LGBTQ plus advisory board? And then a follow-up question, SB 1138 has been referred to the Senate Judiciary, and she wants to know the status of that. Just to give you guys some context, HB 2130 just passed out of the House last night, and SB 1138 is about sexually transmitted infections and has to do with immunodeficiency and hepatitis B. Repeals some stuff about blood donations related to that.
Sure. So thank you, Philip. Yes, the LGBTQ plus advisory board passed with tremendous Democratic support just last night, and it's well on its way.
good. And I don't think there's a parallel bill in the Senate. So my guess is we'll probably be dealing with that after crossover, which I think is February the 10th.
Stop.
So, Delegate, I think it's Delegate Rome's bill. She's been trailblazing a lot of important stuff there.
Yeah, and also just for note, because both the House and Senate have had bill limits this year, we have not duplicated. Many years during the normal session, we'll have a companion bill in the House and the Senate. So both chambers are very familiar, but this time because of bill limits, most of us have coordinated, so we are not carrying the same piece of legislation. And so you'll notice sometimes that we may in one chamber or the other have not seen the other, and that's simply because we're focused on what's currently before our committees and our legislative body. So,
yeah, and the other bill I think that you mentioned, Philip, was Senate Bill 1138, which is Senator Locke's bill. And I believe what that bill looks to do is to repeal a crime related that was, I guess it was put on the books back during the HIV crisis in the mid 80s about infected sexual battery. And I know it's out there, and I know it's been proposed. I don't really know a lot about it, and I'd like to hear more about it. I think it's probably something we need to look at. We've come a long way in terms of AIDS treatment. People can live long lives, normal lives today, thanks to advances we've made in figuring out how to treat that illness. And so I'm not sure that this crime is really as necessary today as it was back then, when the sort of the AIDS crisis was going on back in the Reagan years. So I'm looking forward to the discussion on that. I know, for example, that there are other, I just haven't had a chance to look at it, but there's other, sexually transmitted diseases, which we still allow for like civil causes of action for and other things. So I'm just not clear how they all interplay, but we need to, I'm happy to consider it and look forward to hearing it in the Judiciary Committee soon.
Okay, great. We've got a couple of questions from Grace White coming in from Facebook. First one would be to, it's SB 1224 or HB 2227, which require building codes to follow the IECC standards, which is for energy conservation requirements. She also wants support for the National Popular Vote Compact, and also is asking for support for campaign finance reform, sunsetting coal tax credits, and to exempt certain groups from fines for doing trap, neuter, release for feral cats.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Yep. Jeremy, why don't you're on general laws. Why don't you talk about the building code when that's going to come to your committee?
Yeah, so the building code one is actually pretty complex, unfortunately. So a lot of those get reviewed through the Department of Community Housing Board, and that has a very different composition of industry. In fact, many different fire prevention issues have failed through that regulatory process over the years. I don't think there is a bill or vehicle this year to reform how some of these are reviewed and approved. It goes through a fairly extensive process through building code officials as well as the Community Housing Board. And that one's going to take some work, is my guess. These are long hauls. I've tried to do some very narrow fixes in the last year, and we seem to have gone through sort of a regulatory challenge that we're going to have to figure out as a General Assembly. Not to say that the current piece won't happen, but and there are other changes besides this that I think structurally the General Assembly has to tackle. That's my take.
Yeah, that's one that's been bouncing around for a while, and I mean, changing the building codes for every building in the state is a big deal. And we usually defer to professional boards with a lot of people that know what they're talking about on that instead of us doing it ourselves. And so I understand what they're trying to accomplish with that bill. I think it's important. It'll result in a lot of energy savings, but I need to know more about whether this is the right way to do it or whether we need to trust our administrative process to do it correctly, or as Senator McPike says, whether we need to redo our administrative process because it's not producing good outcomes. But it's definitely a good idea. I just don't know about the right way to do it. To me, it's kind of like us doing mandatory minimum sentences. I mean, we shouldn't be deciding the outcome of a trial. The judge or a jury should after they hear the case. And so we need to, that's kind of where I am on that. There's a lot of other things in there, though. In the National Popular Vote Compact, I'm good with that. I'm on the Privileges and Elections Committee like Delegate King, and I've supported that in the past. There's some people that have concerns about its constitutionality or other weird things that could come out, but I hate the Electoral College. I think it's all premised on slavery. I mean, the whole point it was put in place was because at the time, I think one of the reasons it was put in place was at the time we adopted it, a slave counted as 3/5 of a person for purposes of congressional representation, and they wanted to make sure that counted for the presidential election. And so getting rid of the Electoral College is going to take more time, but I think this is an easier way to get around it. And the animal bills, those animal bills can be tricky. The cat bill, that cat bill you described basically pits the animal rights folks against the people who really like birds. Because if you get the cats and you neuter them and then let them back out, they go out and they eat birds. And so the Audubon Society has a lot of concerns about releasing feral cats in the community and what that leads to and whether that's really the right thing to do with cats. And my mother's a big birder. I hear a lot from my mom about this bill. So I haven't decided how I'm going to vote on it when it comes, but it's actually kind of an interesting problem. And I don't know, Candy, I don't know, you want to talk about any of those?
Sure, I'm happy to take on the campaign finance reform piece, which has been a hot topic this week in the House. I serve on the Privileges and Elections Committee, where that has a couple of bills have come to that committee. And so in the House, we've actually set up, and Delegate Bulova out of Fairfax will be chairing a committee to address complete campaign finance reform. So I believe that this is something, the influence of big money is something that we definitely need to address. But for me personally, it has to be in a comprehensive way. Attacking one or two parts of a big problem is just not sustainable. So I'm glad to see that the House has created this committee. And, I am number 100, but I'll certainly be begging for a seat at the table on that committee to address comprehensive campaign finance reform. So please know that it is being discussed, in the House, and I believe in the Senate as well.
Yeah, and sorry, I wasn't more specific. That bill that you just referred to, the study that Delegate Bulova is leading, is specifically the one that she was asking for support for. So that's great.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Candy more about trying to do this piecemeal. There's a lot of folks that want to just pick off little pieces and say that like one group can't give, or that, or put limits on everything. And what you'll find is that, the federal, basically the Virginia system, we have very few limits, but we have maximum transparency. And the federal system, they have all these like barriers and limits and rules and very little transparencies, right? So what happens is if you have all these limits and rules and you have somebody that would like to put significant money into the system, they end up doing it in ways where you can't see where it goes. It ends up going through a 501c4 or a super PAC, or it goes through some LLC, or they give it through their children or whatever. And whereas in Virginia, if there's somebody that wants to give a larger amount of money, they just write the check and you can see where it went and who it went to, right? And so these are the trade-offs that we have to consider in doing this. There's no question that money in campaigns is a huge problem, and people with lots of money have too much ability to manipulate outcomes in ways, or try to influence outcomes, I guess. But in order to do it correctly, you have to be very careful about how you do it, or else all you end up doing is making all the spending become invisible where you can't see it. So then you have no idea who's trying to influence things. And so you have to do it the right way, and it has to be done comprehensively instead of just picking off a little thing here and there and pretending like you've had a victory. So I agree with Candy 100% on that.
Absolutely. And I'll just add one other thing that is near and dear to me. As we look at comprehensive campaign finance reform, we have to just be sure that we are not creating unintended consequences for particularly Black and Brown candidates who are not as, well connected or, established in the political hierarchy. So we just this is just something that will take time and everyone pulling together to come up with a comprehensive plan.
Yep. Philip, what do we got next?
Great. We are, just to give everybody a heads up, we're coming up on 11 o'clock. So we're going to try to get through just a couple more of these. Looks like we've got about 3 or 4 more questions in the document right now. So that's what I'm going to go through. First one is a softball for you from Joshua King. Any bills for free admission for veterans at all state parks?
I'm not answering your husband's question. You can answer his question.
King, tell Joshua King that there are some children who need his attention right now. They keep popping their head into the Zoom call, but there are actually some bills on the table. Again, with the limits this year, the session in the House was 7 bills. I think there is 1 or maybe 2 related to state parks as well. But that guy can afford to pay to go to the state park. So that veteran, all the other veterans should be able to go to state parks for free except him.
Fair enough. Okay. Question for Senator McPike from Daniel Birdie. Can you elaborate on the effort to expand efforts to address food insecurity that you were talking about earlier? Does this aim to expand the mobile app delivery efforts that are in place? And are some locales via nonprofits like Prince William County, are there organizations or nonprofits in particular that have expressed an interest or support in this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, I think the innovation that we've seen in Prince William Food Rescue has an ability to expand regionally. And so I put in a budget amendment to help in that effort. It does cost resources and supplies, but clearly the yield of being able to have thousands of volunteers, I think it was 11,000 pickup trips, drop-offs between donors and recipient facilities, and be able to have really the technology platform and volunteer ability to, if Scott's up in Fairfax and driving down, or I go to Alexandria, there's actually interjurisdictional travel, and applying sort of the Prince William Food Rescue framework from a regional perspective, I think would be a tremendous asset for our food resiliency and our needs throughout our community. And I think there's some great opportunities to begin to leverage this opportunity, and also have the state help in that process.
Great. Question from Fred Hussein. What is the status of the Potomac Shores VRE station? Is it related to the landmark railroad agreement by the Commonwealth? I believe he's talking about the Long Bridge.
Yeah, I don't think the status of the station is really tied to that. I keep hearing pushed back opening dates for the station. I believe it's under construction. I want to say it's going to be done in the next 12 to 18 months. But the agreement that you're talking about is not connected to it. But I'm really optimistic that we're going to get the Long Bridge funding sped up with the election results down in Georgia, with the election of Reverend, now Senator Ossoff, and
Warnock.
Yeah, Warnock, right? Gabriel, or no, he's not the Reverend. Warnock is the Reverend, and John Ossoff, now Senator Ossoff. You're going to see an infrastructure bill go through Congress, and a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill. And I would be shocked if funding the Long Bridge is not part of that, because the Long Bridge construction is basically the most important infrastructure project on the East Coast, not just Virginia, but the entire East Coast, or the DMV, like the whole East Coast. And so and the importance of that is that once we get those two new rails across the bridge, it completely opens up that Prince William County and Manassas rail corridor to massively more passenger rail traffic. Right now, we just can't fit any more trains on those rails because they can't get over the bridge. But once that opens, you're going to have bi-directional rail service all day long on that line, all the way down to Richmond. And with a job center like, for example, the Amazon location opening up, where they're putting in 35,000 jobs that make $130,000 a year or more, you're going to see a lot of people that want to live in Eastern Prince William, Fredericksburg, Richmond, taking the train to work every day, wanting to live in places like Potomac Shores. People might take the train to a Nats game instead of, trying to battle the traffic to get there. So I think you're going to see an explosion in rail service, and the Potomac Shores rail station is critical to that. And so I think it's probably going to, what I've heard is, again, I think 12 to 18 months before it's open. It's part of the proffer that they built as part of the development, and the developer is the one under control of building it, not any public agency. So, but it's coming.
Great. Just a couple more questions, and one of them is actually a comment from Steve Ann Keaton. House Bill 1970, which was from Delegate Mark Cole, was trying to reestablish voter ID laws. Can you guys comment on your position on government issued ID at the polls, and specifically Delegate King, you voted to kill that one?
Is that the terminology? I think it was gently laid on the table. I don't like that word. I do not support voter ID laws. Some people know this about me, but I am a history fanatic. And I know the history of voter ID laws. I know that they seek to restrict access. I know that there have been, and I've asked this question in the committee of the State Board of Election, there have been no major cases of fraud related to voter ID. I think it's unnecessary and it creates barriers, and I don't foresee my position changing on that. Virginia has had free and fair elections and tremendous turnout, and there's been no evidence of fraud, and I don't think it would help people. So I don't support that.
If I may add, Phil, I'm so proud of Candy's leadership on this position, being on her first year and knowing, how to defend, and that's something that we have been fighting for many years in the House, in the Senate. Democrats, we have been upfront on trying to pass legislation that will not promote voter suppression. So that's definitely Mark Cole was the author of blocking all of these type of all type of voter suppression for years as the chair of the Privilege and Election. So I'm very proud, and I want to commend the speaker because he's no longer serving in that committee as he was for the amount of harm that he has done to Virginia. And I just leave it there.
Oh, I miss those days when I used to battle against Mark Cole on voter ID rules back when I was first there in 2010 through 2015. But and by the way, so everybody understands, you have to show an ID to vote. But if you don't have one, you can just sign a piece of paper affirming your identity to vote. So the current state law and the way the law has been for decades is that if you have, they ask you for photo ID, and it's only if you don't bring it with you. And sometimes people will forget it, or sometimes it's expired. They left it at home. But you have to sign a piece of paper affirming your identity under penalty of felony in order to vote. And I don't know many people that want to, commit a felony to cast a vote. So it's a non-existent problem, and it's people grandstand about it and wave, make a lot of noise about it. But this bill is a solution in search of a problem. And by the way, I remember when I thought about this, I represent up here in Fairfax, there's a monastery with 30 nuns in it. Okay. They don't wear shoes most of the time. They don't have IDs, right? There's a lot of people that, I think when I looked last time, there's something like 50,000 driver's licenses that are lost every year, right? So if you just happen to lose your driver's license, now you can't vote. That's crazy. Like some people, sometimes the police, or if you forget to pay your fines, or you get a conviction in court, the court will take your ID away. I mean, your ability to vote shouldn't be a function of like the fact of whether you happen to have an ID card in your pocket at any one moment in time, if you can say who you are. So it's a silly, I think it's a silly proposal to require it when you can avoid it just by making people sign the piece of paper. I think it's worked for decades, and we just need to leave it the way it is.
And I think Delegate Sorrell made a good point about being a crime and a felony. And I know for so long, I personally was attacked, that when I was elected, it was because a lot of undocumented people voted for me and they came out, and that's how I won, and that's how I got reelected. And I just want, people to understand that, as Senator Sorrell described, if you are undocumented, if you have a green card and you are not a registered voter, you are not a citizen, you could actually go face deportation. So all of that is not true. Thank you.
All right, just one last comment regarding River Farm. This is from Greg Greider, who's a constituent of Senator Sorrell's up in Fairfax, asking for support from everyone else, Senator McPike, Delegate King, and Delegate Guzman, for Senator Ebbins' budget amendment and Delegate Krizek's budget amendment, which would preserve River Farm for public use and enjoyment.
Yeah, and we really need to preserve it because that's where I got married. And if we don't preserve it, my wife's going to kill me. So, but River Farm is about a 30-acre property up in right off the GW Parkway, and the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority would like to purchase it so they can make it available to everybody in Northern Virginia to use it as an event facility. And the American Horticultural Society is talking about selling it to some gazillionaire for their mansion or whatever, and we're trying to stop that. And it would benefit everybody, including people in Eastern Prince William. It's a wonderful place to have events, as I know. But yeah, we need a little bit of state money to help fund that, and everybody on this call's support would be useful in trying to get that get it done.
Yeah, I think we all realize that, places like that and land and, clearly Senator Surville's relationship with his wife are incredibly important. And so, no, but I think we all realize that land like that is, we can't make it, right? And so those opportunities that come up, we've got to make sure to capture, to make sure there's access for everyone in the future and for our kids as well. So I appreciate that.
All right, Phil, oh, go ahead, Candy.
Oh, I was just going to say, I absolutely agree with everything. And I think that, places like River Farm are such a key part of the fabric here. We will need those spaces when outside opens back up. We will want places like that to go with our families and enjoy. It's part of what makes this a beautiful area.
Well, I think thanks guys. I think that's it for our questions. I just want to tell everybody, make sure everybody stays safe out there. Eastern Prince William County, you've been hearing a lot about the virus, and the rates in Eastern Prince William have been a little bit higher than they have in other parts of Northern Virginia, and we need to make sure we get everybody vaccinated. Everybody needs to stay safe in the meantime. All the research shows that they're not even sure vaccination keeps you from transmitting. Right now, they think it just sort of suppresses symptoms, but you could actually still acquire the virus and give it to other people. So we all need to wear masks until everybody has got their vaccine. You need to listen to the president. We finally have an administration that believes in science. All of us are working hard to get those vaccines out so we can get our schools reopened as soon as possible. And we appreciate your questions, comments today. I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to say to wrap things up.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say, thank you for your time. We learn lots from you. We have a lot of experts in Prince William, and I learn something new every day from constituents because we have folks that work in all walks of life and provide that perspective. So please feel free to reach out to us, call us, indicate your thoughts. It is incredibly invaluable to us. So I appreciate everyone joining today.
And what I would say is that tomorrow, I serve as the vice chair of the education committee. So tomorrow there are going to be important issues that will be discussed. If it's education, it's something that you're passionate about. The subcommittee of SOL and SOQs meets at 7 in the morning, and we're actually going to listen the revision of the governor's school admission. It's going to be debated tomorrow at 7 a.m. I know Senator Sorville and I were serving in that work group that we were working on legislation to make that more fair and have more participation from Prince William County and more diversity as well. And also a revision of the SOLs and I know Senator Mark Pike and Delegate King are passionate about. So that bill is going to be listened as well tomorrow at 7 a.m. So if that's something that you support, if something that you are against, please watch, and let us know, because that is going to be extremely important for the future of our children here in Prince William County. And as far as social services, where I'm the chair of the subcommittee, we're making a revision of food stamps as well, eligibility, and trying to expand the services for more people, many people that have to live through this pandemic, and also trying to be more inclusive, but at the same time having conversations. I know Delegate Dolores McQueen is a bill that we passed this week that it's about running a pilot program across the state that will promote to these families in need, to providing more funding so they could eat more vegetables and nutritious meals. And that's something that I know Delegate Roy was passionate about, but so those are the conversations that we're having, and crossover is February 8th, before we know, and it's going to be a short session. So please let us know how you feel about every field. We do respond to our emails, and let us know your positions. That is going to, definitely, as Senator Mark Pike said, expand our vision about the issues when we are looking at this bill. So thank you so much. It's always good to see you.
And I'll just end by saying thank you. Thank you, Juan, for those in the second district who have given me your trust to represent our community. And that is truly how I see it, as a representative of this community. So I encourage you to visit my website. On Monday, you'll be able to sign up to receive a weekly newsletter, to see what's happening in the session and in the committees that I serve on. And you can also visit my website to find links for the session. Please take the opportunity to view the session online and the different committee meetings and share your opinions. We are all in this together. I'm here to represent you. We are extremely fortunate. And I say we because I'm still halfway into the legislator part. I still feel very much like a citizen. We are all in this together, and we are very fortunate to have a dynamic group of legislators leading us. Delegate Torian, who's not here, but who chairs appropriation and the budget. We're very fortunate in this area to be represented very well, as well as Delegate Guzman on education, the things that we care about. So please hold us accountable. Email us, call us. We are here to represent you and your interests. So thank you again for your time today.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. So I think that we'll wrap it up now. Appreciate your time. And thanks for giving us a couple of your hours this morning and your feedback. Appreciate it.